Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our session on Google Workspace security. My name is Lauren, and I'm the content manager for the Google Cloud community. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Kevin, solution engineer, and our Google Workspace expert, who will be taking us through the content today and answering your questions. So with that, questions are encouraged, so please feel free to add them into the YouTube chat box, and we'll be sure to get to them either in the chat or near the end of the presentation. And for any questions that we don't get to, we encourage you to ask those into the Workspace Q&A forums in the Google Workspace community. And you can find a link to that in the YouTube description. All right, with that, I will hand it over to you, Kevin, to jump right into our content today.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Hey, everybody. My name is Kevin. Like Lauren said, I'm kind of a product specialist on Google Workspace. So I'll be taking us through a deep dive into the security side of the product. And mostly what you're going to see here is a couple of slides about a particular feature. I'll explain what that is. We'll jump into a demo, kind of show around what the admin side of it looks like. For some of them, we'll show what the end user will experience. But this is mostly geared towards admins who are in control of the admin console, what they can configure when they would use it. So with that being said, we can just go ahead and get started. So just to recap, Google Workspace is kind of this one-and-all platform for a flexible, innovative, and secure work environment. And we're kind of going to take a look into that third one as a deep dive. So we're looking at the red piece down at the bottom. How do we do data leak protection? How do we do zero trust? How do we do context aware and risk management? That's generally what we're going to tackle here. And we're going to start with data protection. So what we're talking about here is a couple of numbers. We block on average over 15 billion types of spam messages from reaching our users on Gmail. Gmail itself blocks over 99.9% of phishing, malware, and spam related messages. And so just kind of some numbers here to throw out before we actually jump in. Okay, so feature number one that we're going to talk about, we call it DLP. It stands for data loss prevention. And the scenario here is to help the admins, the users, prevent accidental or purposeful data leakage. And the idea with this is if you try to share content outside of your organization that contains sensitive information, whether it's sensitive to the company or it's sensitive according to some other standard, a credit card number, a social security number, we provide those controls so that you can prevent that from actually happening. And we'll take a look at that demo in just a sec. So with this, we can enforce actions such as warn the user that a particular item contains sensitive info before they share it out, allow it but log it, or block that incident from happening. And you can do this with a couple of different ways. We can use word lists, regular expressions, or we can even use our own templates that Google provides to prevent users having to configure those themselves. To add on to that, we are also able to leverage drive labels to kind of increase that security posture. And so the idea with this being you can go into a document, mark that document as sensitive, top secret, internal only, and have that trigger the protection of whether a document should be shared out or should not be allowed to be shared out. And so where can we target this? With DLP and Google Workspace, we're able to target any document within Google Drive, Gmail, Google Chat messages, and then Chrome. We'll talk about Chrome because it's kind of a special scenario. But anything that lives within Drive, whether it's a PDF, an Excel document, a native Google document, we can prevent that type of information from being shared through those mediums, including chat and Gmail as well. Last feature that we're going to talk about before we start one piece of the demo is what we call trust rules. And so the scenario with this is previously when we talked about DLP, this was generally meant for, hey, there is sensitive information in this particular document. We don't want that to be shared because it's sensitive. What trust rules allows you to do is tackle the concept of sharing as a whole. And the reason why admins would want to do this is if you're working cross-functionally with vendors or contractors, a subset of your users might need to collaborate with that third party, but nobody else should be able to share documents between each other for the same risk of data leakage, sensitive information being shared out. And so trust rules tackles that piece of it. It controls who can share and who can receive with which other entities, whether they're internal or external. And we'll take a look at that in just a second as well. But generally, the idea for this one is if you work with different organizations, some orgs should be able to collaborate, others, there's no reason for them to. So, from a security perspective, we want to prevent that from happening. All right. So, with that being said, let's actually take a look at some of the demo pieces and we'll go in order. We'll start with DLP. We'll take a look at what that looks like, and then we'll switch over to trust rules. Okay. So, you're now seeing my admin console. So as an admin, I want to configure a policy to prevent sensitive information from being shared externally. And so what I'm going to do is from the security page, I will head into access and data control, data protection, and I'm going to manage a rule. So in order to actually trigger this, I need to have content to look through. So what specifically should be blocked? I have a couple of options here. I could use a regular expression, or I could use a word list if I already know specifically what content to protect. For example, reference to a specific internal project or a specific word, a phrase, an email address. I can set that information here. Or I could leverage the templates as I mentioned earlier, and that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to create a rule. And the scenario that I want is prevent any financial information from being shared externally. And financial information could include credit card numbers, it could include social security numbers, um, any other types of PII that could generally be found in the finance industry. So I'm going to select that as my template because Google will provide all of the content types that will match it. And so that takes the onus away from me as the admin having to write all these different policies myself. So I'm going to select that. And then I have to figure out where should this target, who should be affected by this policy. Some of these, maybe some of our users do need to be able to share this information for valid reasons, but not everybody else. So we have the granularity to tackle specific OUs or specific groups from this rule. And here's where we can select what's the scope of these different policies. As I mentioned, everything in Google Drive is covered, whether it's a native document or not. Same thing with Google Chat. And then Chrome is a bit of a special case that we'll look at a little bit later. But just know we can do this at the Chrome level. It just requires an add-on as well. So let's tackle that example. Let's do Google Drive and Google Chat. Nobody should be able to send out this information through either of these mediums. So we'll hit continue. And here's where we can select all of our different types of data. And this is coming from Google's template system. So we have things like credit card numbers, we have bank account numbers, domains, email addresses, a bunch of stuff that we can use here that we can play around and mix and match from either our own content or templates. So let's hit continue here. And now we're taken to the actions page. So what happens if I actually want, or what should happen if something happens to this data? If somebody tries to share it out, what should be the action, the result? And we have a couple of options here for Google Chat. So if I send a message to somebody that contains this information, I can block that message. I can warn the user and let them know that this contains sensitive information and you must say, yes, I'm okay with that, send it anyway. Or I can choose to keep it in audit only just for monitoring reasons, as well as scoping where we should monitor this activity. And we can choose to, now in beta, provide a custom message telling the user exactly why this message was not able to be sent or why they received that warning. And you can optionally include a link to maybe your internal policies on how to safely communicate data or something external. With Google Drive, we have a couple of different options. We can block whole the external sharing, we could warn, but we could also disable the ability to download, print, and copy that file. So even if we do share that document, we don't want people to make copies of it and put them into their own local devices. And we could also apply Drive labels so that we could automatically classify these documents as internal, NDA only, restricted. Flexibility here is kind of key. And we can choose to allow the user to make changes to this if we need to. And then, of course, the last piece is how do we actually get this information as admins, as security teams? We can set alerting policies here for who should be alerted based on this criteria. Now, as a user, I have this example credit card data. It's just mock data. There's nothing real here, but it will trigger these different policies. And so, what I, as a user, can see is on the top right hand corner, I have this warning symbol that tells me that this particular document contains sensitive content. So, visually, I know that something else is happening here. And if I try to share this out and I try to share this with an external domain, so this is somebody outside of my company, could be a Gmail, it could be somebody else. And if I try to send that out, we're going to contain the error message that this is blocked because contains restricted content, and therefore we cannot share that. And that's just all based on the policy that I set previously. Let's go back over here. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the drive sharing, the trust rules, as we call them. So for that, we're going to go into the rules page of the admin console, and we can create a new trust rule. And so with this, we can have policies that say, for example, if you are in engineering, you can share to engineering, but you should not be able to share documents to the marketing team, for example. There's no reason, at least in this scenario, for why those two teams should be able to provide documents to each other. So we can say engineering to marketing. Then we can specify the scope. So I could include my engineering team so that only they are affected by this policy. And I can toggle whether this should affect on the receiving side or the sharing side. So if I share a file to somebody or if somebody tries to share that to me, what should happen? So I'm going to tackle sharing files first, and then I'll add my condition. And here's where I can target exactly who is going to be in scope for whether I should block this or not. And the options are kind of plentiful here. I can target a specific user. So if for some reason I have a need to block a user from sharing any documents, I can choose that here. I can tackle this by the organizational unit. So in our example, this would be marketing. But I could also use Google Groups. And the really neat thing here is you could also leverage external organizations. So going back to the earlier example of if you're working with a third party, a vendor, we want to pick out just those people that we're working with rather than the entire company to be able to have this permission. Same thing with domains and even anybody with a Google account. So preventing, for example, Gmail sharing specifically. Hit continue. And the actions are pretty straightforward here. We could either allow that sharing to happen, we could allow it with a warning, or we could block that from happening. And so if I'm a user and I'm working on my engineering design document internally, which has internal only information, I should not be able to share that document to people in marketing or anybody with a Google account. That should only remain available to the engineering team as a whole. Okay. We'll talk about the reporting, the visibility, all that kind of stuff in just a second. But from a feature perspective, this is what an admin would look to create and what the end user would experience. So with that, we're going to switch back over to the presentation, talk about a couple more features, and then we'll switch back to a demo. Okay, so here's where we're going to spend a couple of minutes here. Google Workspace provides the security center, and this is kind of a three-piece tool, if you will. The security health on the far left-hand side, that is a way that Google is going to check your policies, what your admin has configured, against Google's best practices, and optionally provide recommendations for what you could do to increase that posture. And so this will check, for example, do you have X enabled in the Gmail settings? Have you enabled two-factor authentication? Should you? Here's the reason why. Provide you that recommendation as well as a checkbox if you've done so. Tool in the middle, the security dashboards. This is for the admins who want to get a holistic view of what security looks like at the domain level. So, for example, how many emails are coming in that are bouncing back? Or how many are being encrypted? How many are going to spam? How many files have been shared externally? Scenarios like that where you have a question and it just makes the most sense to visually see it with numbers so that you can then track it down later. And in order to actually track it down later, you leverage the investigation tool. And so this is kind of that discovery tool that's available for admins so that they can look through specific data logs, Gmail, Drive, Google Voice, user action, so on and so forth. And they can look for specific attributes that they're interested in. Was an email deleted? Was something forwarded? Was something downloaded? Did a user fail a login? Those types of scenarios is where you can use the investigation tool to kind of understand. So these three tools make up the security center, and this is where admins tend to spend a lot of time to understand what security is looking like in their environment, and as well as being able to create some policies around it. So let's take a look at it. We're going to share the demo environment again, and this time we're going to go into admin, security, security center, and we're looking at these three tools here. Security health is the easiest to kind of explain. It just compares a bunch of the policies that you may or may not have enabled, the status of them, as well as recommendations for why you might want to do or do not make these available, as well as a support article where you can learn how to actually implement that particular thing. And if you do, we provide this checkbox that tells you that you've enabled this thing, you're good to go, this is secure, we can move on. And you can see a couple of examples here. Some of it are disabled so that we can provide recommendations. Some of them are enabled and they have that green checkbox. But this tells me as an admin, where could security be lacking? What could I improve? Where are the potential threat vectors? One sec while I drink some water. Okay. So now we're seeing the dashboard. So this is the second feature from the slide deck. This, like I said, is more for admins to provide a holistic overall security view of their environment. So here we can see, for example, how many messages were encrypted with TLS. In this case, we have some specific numbers that we can back that up. And if we need to, we can view that report to drill deeper into who, where, when, what was that message. A couple of other examples here are, where are the incoming messages going to? Are they being sent over to the spam? Are they being sent over somewhere else? What's happening here? Suspicious attachments is a regular common used one. And then one that I forgot to explain here is this one, external file sharing. So this will help answer the question of how many documents are out there in the world? Who has access to this document? What can they see? What permissions do they have? How do we get that visibility? This is a dashboard that shows you overall what that looks like. Okay, and now we're going to look at the investigation tool. This is generally the most powerful tool that you have access to as an admin because you could do plenty of different things with it, including some stuff that should require an extra bit of justification. So we'll examine what that looks like. But this is really your super powered search across everything security, everything logs in your admin console. So if you have a question of, hey, I know that this email in particular was sent, but it should not have been sent out. People received it that should never have gotten it. So how do we take that information back? How do we delete that email without informing everybody that this happened? So as an admin, I can look through a different data source, in this case, Gmail, and I can add some conditions about what I'm particularly searching for. In my case, I know that that email contained this particular subject and it was sent by this user. I'm going to hit search. We'll wait for those results to come back. And now what I have is a clear understanding of that email. So I can pull it up and I can see the ID, the headers, who it was sent to, where it came from, when it was delivered, a whole bunch of information that I might need for this. And optionally, I can choose to employ some of these policies that say if we're going to do something particularly sensitive, we should be able to provide justification for why we're doing it. So from a logging perspective, we can see that information here. And here I have the original message. So if it contained an image, for example, I can recover that if I need to, download it for further analysis, see the entire thread. But I could also take actions on this email. So if I need to delete the email, I can do that without having the user do it themselves. I can bulk delete these emails from the inbox or restore them if they had previously been deleted and it's been past the 30 days for an admin to recover. I can use this to do that, as well as being able to take some administrative action to send something elsewhere, put it as phishing, put it as spam, send it to quarantine, or if it was already there, put it into the inbox. And I can do this in bulk with a bunch of different emails. So another scenario that's useful here is to find those documents that are externally shared and figure out who has access to it. So I can look at any documents that are shared externally that are owned by this particular user, and maybe the document type, we just care about Google Docs for this case. So I'm going to hit search here. So we'll give it just a second. And this will search for the past 6 months of information. So 180 days, give or take, from when something happened. You will be able to find that information in here. So here's a couple of those documents. And I can here choose an action again to audit the file permissions and understand exactly who has access to that document, whether it's a Gmail user, some different company, anybody with a link. I can figure that out and revoke the permissions if I need to. I can remove the users as well, disable the ability for this file to be downloaded, change the owner, as well as do a couple of other things. And so this is really kind of a powerful tool. There's a lot of different stuff. These actions will be different based on what logs you're querying through. So for users, for example, this could be a scenario where you find all the users who failed their login 3 times, and maybe you choose to reset their password from here. Another thing that this lets you do is actually build custom dashboards. So if the dashboards that are pre-integrated by Google don't meet your needs, or you have additional ones that are particular for your environment, you can create your own custom chart based on the investigation that you craft in here. Provide a description, provide a title, and now you have yourself a dashboard in here to monitor and take action if you need to. And the last thing that's worth calling out here is the activity rules. So this actually lets you do a little bit of automation, a little bit of preemptive measures. So I can choose to say, every time that this happens, I need you to do this other thing in here. So an example could be, if you find that somebody deleted a particular email that contained some type of keyword, maybe something from HR, and somebody deleted that, I want you to automatically restore that message. We shouldn't have to worry about that use case. We want those messages to be just put right back into the inbox. Or the opposite. If you have something that triggers some policies within your company and it finds its way, the email does, into one of your employees, delete that email automatically, as well as the alerting and the severity for this. Great. So a lot of stuff that we can do in here. This is all being recorded, so it should be useful if you want to go back and see the different options in here. Won't spend too much more time in here. Let me go back to the slide deck here. Just did that demo. Okay. So these next two things are more for compliance reasons. There was a couple of questions that came in about how do we do compliance? How do we ensure that you meet things like GDPR, et cetera? These are two of the ways that we do that. I'll start with data regions. The idea with this is some companies have needs to store their data elsewhere. Some of them have to be able to control that this particular group of users, their data has to live in Europe for GDPR. This other group of people, their data has to live in the US. This third group, maybe we don't care where it is. So we have that ability to kind of fine tune where that data resides. Now, going back over here. This is more for the highly regulated industries who have a need to encrypt their own documents in a way that they can manage the encryption mechanisms. They are in control of the encryption keys, as well as the identity service to make everything actually work together. And so that feature, client-side encryption, it actually takes the encrypting mechanism away from Google and puts it in the hands of the customer. So they can host the encryption keys wherever they choose. They can control exactly who has access to it for regulated industries, usually is the case. And they could either do it themselves or they could do it with a third party partner, such as the ones listed in that third bullet point there. But the idea with this is we need to be able to collaborate in Google Docs, in Gmail, still have meetings, still have calendar, but we need to be in charge of the controlling mechanism that encrypts and decrypts that information. Okay. Security sandbox. The problem here is with attachments. Attachments are a good threat vector to kind of deploy malicious scripts, zero-day exploits, other types of embedded threats into something you can just double click on a PDF, for example. And so what the security sandbox does is it essentially provides a virtual environment, if you will, virtual machine, where you take that document and you could double click it essentially to figure out what it's doing. What calls is it making? What processes is it spinning up? Analyzing it if it contains any of these potential threat vectors. And then as an admin, you can choose to put that into spam and disable the users from actually downloading it or clicking on that link or anything that could result in them actually triggering that vector. And so you can use this in conjunction with the DLP features that we talked about earlier. So if an email comes in to your C-suite, for example, and it contains specific keywords and an attachment, you might choose to deploy the security sandbox for that attachment for those users instead of for every attachment for everybody. So you have that granularity to kind of fine tune when should you use this, when should you not. All right. Access control and beyond corp enterprise. So access control is really more about how do we ensure that the people that need access to something are meeting the correct requirements for it. And so this is going to speak to Beyond Corp, which is an add-on product under Google Workspace. But the way that this used to be done was through a VPN. So a user would sit at their computer, click on their VPN, enter their credentials, and at that point, when they're connected to the network, they see all of their resources. They can click, they can log in, etc. But with this new way of working, now that we have this hybrid work, a lot of people are remote. Some people have company devices and then their own device the next day. Some people are traveling and they all need access to this same services. The VPN solution starts to kind of show some security gaps there, as well as some control gaps. And so the way that we tackle this with Google and with Google Workspace is with a couple of different components. One of these is Titan keys for added verification as a two-step authentication. Um, and we'll talk about how that relates to what we're just talking about here. But context-aware access is kind of the important one here. The idea with this is, whereas a VPN is about network-based access, if you're in the network, you're trusted. If you're outside, you're a threat. This takes that and kind of decouples it so that each application provides its own mechanism for when you should have access, when should you not. So each application dictates the controls for that user. And so we do this based off of what we know about the user. What do we know about their device? What do we know about what other potential services are reporting about that user or that device? And then we put that information together to either grant or block access to that service. So I'll give you an example here. We're going to find this under security, access and data control, context-aware access. So just give me a second to log back in. And we'll be back in just a sec. All right. So access levels. This is where I actually define what is the policy. So you can see a couple of examples in here. If you're a Chrome user, you can select the policy that says for this particular application, maybe whatever is considered a corporate resource, an internal resource, that must be accessed from Google Chrome. For other applications, maybe we don't really care about if you're accessing it from Chrome or Edge or Safari or anything else. So we'll create an access level here. Access to Gmail. And we can have a couple of options here. If I want to do a basic rule, I can choose based on the IP. So if I only want people to be working on this, if they're in the office and we know what the office's network looks like, we can choose that. as well as the location. So if we only want access for a particular application, if you're in the US, we can select that in here. If you don't have any users in some other country, you can just block any access coming from that country. At device and device OS level, there was a question that came in about how do we ensure that users aren't using their personal devices to access corporate resource? This would be an approach to that. So if your device is admin approved or if it's company owned, maybe then we'll allow access. But if it's not, so if it does not meet either of these attributes, we're going to reject that. And so a user is not going to be able to get access to those resources until they meet these policies. Um, and you could, of course, combine these with others as well. So that was basic. You could also do advanced. So if these needs are a little bit too basic, as the name implies, for your needs, you can choose to use advanced and actually create your own policies in a pseudo scripting language. So, for example, you could have requirements that say if you're going to get into a particular application, you must have two-factor authentication, and that second factor has to be a hardware key. If you're going to do it from a company device, maybe it's two-factor, but it could be a passcode, it could be something else, a text message. But if it's coming from a personal device, that has to be a hardware key. So you can write these types of policies for your needs. It again at the application level and even at the user group and OU level, because they're going to have different needs. Contractors might have different needs and different information about the device and different apps that they need access to than your full-time employees. Marketing is going to work on different applications than engineering. So we should be able to uh, trigger each of these depending on that app and where that user lives. So, for example, if I want marketing to use calendar, I want them to only use that with Google Chrome and they have to be on a company device. So I can assign those two policies there. And if they don't meet them, I can choose to block. And I can also choose to block the application itself. So not just the web access, but also the mobile app if they have it on their phone, as well as APIs. Go ahead and cancel out here. Alrighty, so we're almost done. The last thing that we're going to have to touch on here is, and I'm sorry I can't demo this to you. I don't have a separate device in here. But you can do this for first-party applications as well as third-party applications. So if you have SAML applications, things like Salesforce or Slack or Asana or any of these other types of applications, you could apply those same policies here. It's not just Google's native tools. And now to kind of hit the point home, we just talked about secure access. The idea and the lead up to Beyond Corp is we want to be able to protect your corporate data while users work securely and effectively on the web from anywhere with any device. It doesn't matter if it's a company owned device, a bring your own device scenario, if they're in the office one day, at home the next, all those different pieces that move, as long as we are able to evaluate the user itself and their device at the time of access, that's when we should apply these policies instead of assuming that just because you connected fine yesterday, you should be able to connect again today for the same application. And so that leads us into what we call Beyond Corp. This is kind of that next step of zero trust. Briefly, what this is Google's implementation of the zero trust architecture, the trust nothing, verify everything type of model. And you already saw some of that functionality leading up to this with context aware access. So this is something that's built on Chrome. So there is no kind of extra agent that has to be run on every computer, on every device, on every endpoint. This is all coming straight through Chrome as that agent that is going to allow or block or apply policy. And so obviously this requires no extra overhead from managing applications and software. And the users don't have to worry about making sure that they're turning on that particular tool every single day and that they log out at the end of the day, making sure that it's up to date, etc. This is just the same way that they can access any applications through the web. Now you're doing it with the protection and backing of Chrome and Beyond Corp. So what does it actually do? Like, what does it actually do from a practical perspective? It ensures zero trust to not just Google's applications and Google Workspace applications, which is what we just saw with context aware access. Beyond Corp lets you take this to the next level and protect the applications that live, for example, on the web, or sorry, on the cloud or on prem even. So applications that normally are outside of the scope of Google Workspace, if you have something running on GCP, our cloud, or AWS, or Azure, or something else, or even if you have something running on prem locally in some server somewhere, BeyondCorp can help secure access to all those different applications so you can still administer and secure that properly. So you could apply those same policies and say, if you want to get access to that web application that's hosted on whatever cloud, you must be in the US with two-factor on a company device. Otherwise, you're going to have to meet these other requirements or maybe just block access completely. The next thing that's going to do, and this is where we can circle back to the Chrome piece that we saw earlier at the beginning of this presentation in DLP. BeyondCorp is what allows you to extend those protections to anything at the Chrome level. So we'll take a look at that in just a sec. But with standard vanilla Google Workspace, you can protect workspace applications, Drive, Gmail, Chat, but you have sensitive information that lives elsewhere in other resources, in your CRM tool, in your HR tool, for example. That is information that still needs to be protected. And we don't want, in some scenarios, users downloading that into their own personal device or uploading something from their device over to those services for maybe compliance reasons or even just general security. And so, what Beyond Corp allows you to do is actually kind of extend that protection and apply the same policies to anything happening on the browser. So, let me show you a quick example, but we'll finish it up here. Third thing that it does is malware and phishing protection. Because we're using Chrome as the entry point, Chrome provides that safe browsing API that lets you do content analysis, prevent particularly malicious files from making their way in or out to a user's device or your corporate systems. And then it provides you that visibility and those insights to identify who are the high risk users, where is data transfer happening, where are these leaks. So it provides you those logs and that visibility, as well as the ability to kind of put that into a SIM chronicle, for example. So you can evaluate this with a whole bunch of other logs and you start to build yourself a better narrative of security for your entire organization. So let me switch over here. We're going to go back to data protection and just a sec. Security, access control, data protection, manage rules. So similar scenario. This time we don't want any health information. Maybe we're a healthcare company and we need to protect any information from making their way into a system where it should not live or making its way out of a system to, again, where it should not be. So in my case, I'm going to apply this to everybody in the policy. Everybody has to be affected by this. And with Beyond Corp, this allows me to target Chrome for this information. So I can see that in addition to protecting my workspace applications, I can protect any file that is being uploaded into Google Chrome, any file that's being downloaded. If we are copying and pasting, for example, or if we're printing a document, or even if we're visiting URLs that are considered, either dangerous, suspicious, or even if you as an admin have a need to disallow sensitive information in social media websites, gambling websites, any of those types of scenarios, all we need to do is just toggle these in here, choose what type of content we want to scan. So maybe in my case, I'll scope this down a little bit. I care about file upload, file download. I can click on content here and I can analyze the file size, the file type. So maybe a particular category, right? So text, applications, images, multimedia, so on and so forth. I can target specific MIME types if I know what those are. So these could be JSON, credentials, PDFs, scripts. so on and so forth. A bunch of information that you have access to here, but you could target exactly what you need to make sure that it doesn't make its way out or up into those resources or out of them. So let me choose an example here. We're going to block this in here. And then in Chrome, we can just block that file outright from being uploaded, or we could allow with a warning or even just audit if we need to. And then if I'm an admin, after I've set up these policies, I want to understand what the visibility looks like. Has this triggered any policies? What domains, what applications, which users? I can leverage the dashboards. And BeyondCorp will provide these new information around my threat vectors on Chrome, the high risk users, the ones that are uploading and downloading, the ones that are clicking around, copying information, what domains are the most risky, all this type of data protection summaries. I can view these. And in my case, thankfully, I don't have anything to show. But this is generally where you are going to collect those logs and understand what is happening outside of just Google Workspace. What's happening with those other applications that people are getting to through the web? Let me go back in here. I think we're almost done with slides. It looks like we're doing good on time. We are. All right. So it looks like we have about 8 or so minutes to kind of talk about some stuff. Every one of these, of course, could be their own hour-long session, if not more. DLP, security investigation tool in particular, has a lot of things that you can do. Activity rules and automations, a bunch of stuff that we can generally tackle. But really the purpose here is to kind of provide that exposure, what it would look like, what can it do, when would you use this or that, as well as some of the extensions of where else you can go with this, in particular with Beyond Corp, with those security keys to manage access instead of relying on, for example, a VPN or no control at all. And so, of course, the theme of the topic is security. These are different ways in which different companies will choose to secure that environment for different reasons. Maybe some of them work in highly regulated industries, or they themselves are a government entity. Everybody stands to benefit something out of these different types of controls, if not all of them. So we have about 5 or so minutes, 6 or so minutes or so. Lauren, I guess I'll hand it over to you. Do we want to talk about resources, answer some questions?
Yes, thank you so much for that presentation information and the demos. And thank you everyone for sticking with us here and for all of your questions. So we will actually take it through to the hour and go through briefly just a few additional resources and then jump into your questions. So hang tight and we'll be sure to get through those. So first, just a few resources for you. At the top is that workspace community. So if there are any questions we're not able to get to today, that is where you can ask them and also search for answers because it may already exist and be answered there. You can also stay up to date on future events like this one there. And the link is in the YouTube description. That second link is our Google Workspace security white paper. So you can check that out and get more information about what we covered today. Thirdly is the feedback form for this event, which will drop into the chat box in just a moment, but it'll just take 30 seconds to a minute. And we'd love to hear your feedback on this session and any ideas or topics you have for future sessions. And then lastly are just highlighting a few of those that are coming up focused on Workspace, particularly with some product updates next week and diving more into security with Microsoft AD and Azure Active Directory on the 28th. And then lastly, diving into AppScript on October 6th. All right, well, moving along, we'll jump right into your Q&A. So we did receive a few pre-submitted questions, which we believe will cover some that you have as well, but then we'll jump right into the chat. So let's dive in. Our first question is around data encryption. So what encryption standards does Google Workspace adhere to?
Yeah, good question. So this is the advanced encryption standard. So AES 256. We use 128-bit and above. This and more information about how specifically do we encrypt it at rest, in transit, where are the processes happening, what locations, who can access. This is all information that is covered in our security white paper. So that is easily accessible online. Lauren pointed it out just a slide ago. That's something that you can go in and read for yourself, exactly how we handle encryption. But in standard is AES 256.
Great. Thank you. And just drop that link into the chat as well so you can have quick access to it. Okay, so around compliance and regulations, how does Google Workspace help organizations meet industry-specific compliance requirements like GDPR and HIPAA? Are there tools or features to assist with compliance reporting?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, with all things generally regulated, Google is not the arbiter, if you will. So, Google's not the authority on whether you as a company are compliant. It tends to be a shared responsibility where, as the company, as a software provider, we will ensure that we meet XYZ requirements and we provide those reports. But as you saw in the presentation here, we provide the tools so that you have access to the right tooling to ensure that you are meeting those requirements according to whatever your auditors are looking for. So, for example, DLP is a tool that we provide as a way to prevent external sharing. Now, you as the company can choose to use that and provide justification that you will have some controls around this, and you can show those features to those auditors. So we provide the tooling, we provide our compliance status, and we provide some in the case of HIPAA. We provide an implementation guide about some of the watch points, some of the things that you should or should not configure or disable. But it's generally a shared responsibility. So the answer is we do provide the tools, we provide the features, but we don't provide the checkbox, if you will. We do have service partners that can help with that, though.
Great. Makes sense. Okay, I do want to make sure we get to your live questions, so we can come back to any of the pre-submitted ones if we have time. But let's dive in. So, can I use trust rules to prohibit users in a particular organizational unit in our org from being able to discover files that are shared and searchable to the rest of the org?
Yeah, so trust rules are generally about the concept of sharing and receiving files. So the action of me clicking share on a file, putting your name or anybody from that OU, and then trying to send it, that's what trust rules is going to allow or disallow. It's not so much about the searchability of those documents.
Makes sense. Okay. Our next question is, what if I have set up multiple domains and I am sharing with our domain shared in Google Workspace? Why is it still triggering for internal sharing, and how to avoid not to apply on internal sharing?
So, Mohammed, I think this might be talking about trust rules. I'm not entirely too sure. This is going to depend on a couple of different things. When you say multiple domains, is it a secondary domain, an alias domain inside of the same workspace tenant, or if they're different instances that exist, in which case we might consider some of those as internal, some of them are external. But a good way that you can start is actually using the investigation tool to search for the rules themselves and see what events triggered it. That'll hopefully get a little bit of a better perspective of why could it be happening. But generally, this is something that we would want to investigate at a deeper level, unfortunately.
Makes sense. And yep, if you have any additional context too, you can add that into the chat or into the community. So we did get a couple of questions around, which features are available for which SKUs. So, Kevin, if you have any additional context on that, including any of the features that you shared today, and at the same time, I'm going to drop a link to our support article about comparing the different workspace editions, so you can have that on hand.
Yep. So the environment that I was using was Enterprise Plus, which is the highest tier of Google Workspace. So a lot of the features that you saw in there are only available on that SKU. Client-side encryption is one of them. The Gmail logs themselves in the investigation tool, and a couple of others. But things like DLP, things like the security center, things like context-aware access, those are available generally on any enterprise SKU. and some of them are available on business. But the holistic picture of everything that you saw today is available on Enterprise Plus. And that breakdown that Lauren will send will tell you exactly which features are in one versus the other.
Great, thank you. Yep, and that resource is in the chat now. Okay. From Stephen, it seems entries are only logged in the Drive log events data source if an event has been logged against a specific document ID. What if we are outside the 6-month retention window? Drive API.
Yeah, so this is a good point. The investigation tool is meant for it searches across logs generally, meaning something had to have happened to a file, to a user, to an app, and then that generates that log, which is valid for 6 months. We are talking internally, and we're trying to do some work around being able to search and query through static data, so just broad searches, broad information that doesn't require a particular event. But it's not something that we have finalized yet. So Drive API would be that resource that you would need for that type of information. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention is the investigation tool only keeps logs for 6 months, but you do have the option to export all of these logs into BigQuery, for example, which is our kind of data warehouse. And so that will retain logs for as long as you need them for. And then you can use SQL or SQL-like queries to build a lot of those investigations on that side of the house if you need them for longer.
Great, thank you. How to deal when we need to share a file with a partner with edit permission and we don't want the file to be downloaded?
Yeah. So part of this is going to be a combination of this file label type. So with DLP, for example, you can say, doesn't I don't really care about the content itself, but if it has this particular label, I want you to allow it, but don't let people download that file. So DLP is probably the answer that you're looking for here. You can just target any type of content or not really much content at all. You can use the label, and you can do it that way. You could also set up some additional policies around just drive sharing in general, so that you are ensuring that only the right people are getting that file and they're not taking action beyond that.
Great. From Chris, you mentioned a rule to only allow access if using the Chrome browser. I couldn't find docs on this. Is it possible? And I believe that's the context aware.
Yeah. So I can actually show you that really quickly here.
Awesome.
So we're going to go in here into access control, context aware access. And this is something that you're going to have to write as part of the advanced um, access control. So this here, but I've written that policy here. And we'll wait for that just a sec to load. Okay, so here's an example of that policy. We can say that the device for Chrome has to be at least this version. So that's an example of how you would write that particular policy so that if you're coming from anywhere that's not that device with that configuration, you will be rejected. And so in general, you're going to find a lot of this information in the Access Context Manager documentation. So this is where we can talk about every different attribute that you can target. So here's where Chrome is, for example. You can choose to see if it's managed, unmanaged, if this particular policy is enabled or not. But a lot of information, you'll find it in the Access Context Manager documentation.
Great. Thank you. Okay. We'll move on. Is the BigQuery integration also only available for Enterprise Plus? If you know offhand, we can answer it here, or we can also look back into the documentation that we shared for clarification.
I believe you don't need Enterprise Plus. And actually, yes, that is correct. So you can do exports to BigQuery and Frontline Enterprise Standard and Enterprise Plus, as well as a couple of our education SKUs. So it's not an Enterprise Plus feature.
Right, thank you. Since a lot of critical updates have come out on Chrome browser, what's the best way to ensure everyone's browser is updated automatically?
Yeah, so Google actually provides a for free the CBCM, the Chrome Browser Cloud Management, which is an add-on that you can get in the admin console. It's free, like I mentioned. You can assign that to every user, and that allows you to actually manage the browser itself. So you can set what policies are enabled on it, what extensions can be allowed, um, how to manage updates to ensure that it's forced update or users can toggle it on their own. So Chrome Browser Cloud Management is the tool that you're looking for to manage all things Chrome as an admin.
Great. Can we control the Google Drive to be open from a specific IP, but not to be opened from mobile or other IPs?
You can, yes. So that would be a part of the context-aware access policy. So again, I will quickly share this over here. So access control, context-aware access. You will create your policy first. So if you have a specific IP subnet, so an internal IP, so I am not too worried about sharing this, but um, you set your policies or your ranges with CIDR notation. And then what you can do is you can go into Google Drive, assign it, and then toggle that particular IP policy that you just created. And so anybody coming in from that IP, they're valid, they can get in there. If you're outside of that range, you will be blocked.
Got it. And thank you for your question around where can we get a synopsis of this session. So the recording will be available as soon as we end today, and you can watch it from the same YouTube link that you're using right now. But we'll also be planning on doing a recap summary in the Google Workspace community itself so that we can pull away the key takeaways from here. So stay tuned there, and we'll be sure to do that. And then we did just see a follow-up from Jeff regarding the BigQuery access. And I'll mention if you have any additional context to Kevin, if you can reach out to your account rep to get additional context or information, and also contact support if needed. But any troubleshooting tips, Kevin? I know we have a limited information, but any advice you might have?
Yeah, so generally what happens is BigQuery is managed on the Google Cloud Platform side, so all the access controls, there's a lot of controls there that could be conflicting. From the workspace side of it, though, um, all we really need to verify here is under reports, BigQuery export, you have to enable it first, and you have to provide that particular ID for wherever BigQuery is, and then a data set within it. And that's really the only controls that are available that you need to worry about in Workspace. If there's access controls that could be part of IAP, or sorry, IAM on the GCP side, which would be unfortunately outside of the scope of Workspace. But it is something that we can definitely help with. It's generally more of getting in contact with the rep for your account, and we can take a look.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I think we have time just for a couple more. So here's one is there's a new integration announced with Okta and Chrome Managed Browser. Will I be able to have separate context-aware access policies for each Okta application?
I believe the answer to this one is yes. I'm not too aware of what Okta's integrations could be doing, but with Workspace and with BeyondCorp, you can target applications that are SAML and even cloud-based. So if those applications are SAML applications and Okta is being used as the identity provider, for example, I don't foresee any issues with applying those policies to them.
Got it. Okay, I think we'll just take two more. Is it possible to create a rule if an email goes to quarantine and it's from a specific recipient, and if it's from a specific recipient, gets automatically allowed?
Yes. So this would be part of the activity rules, which those are an Enterprise Plus feature for Gmail. So you can create an investigation in there to target where did that email go, spam, phishing, etc. And then you target that specific user. The activity rule, the action that would be set there is to put that message into the inbox.
Okay, great. All right, last one. And thank you again, all. As a final reminder, if you do have any questions that we weren't able to get to, please drop them into the community and our team will be monitoring them, and your peers may be able to help you out as well. What if I have set up multiple domains? Oh, we actually already asked this one. Sorry about that. I think we have one more from this person. There we go. DLP rules, if we set up for external sharing on Drive or email, it will trigger for if we are sharing the document or email internally between the domains we configured in Google Workspace. How to fix this?
Yeah. So DLP is meant for if the content itself is sensitive and is trying to leave the organization. That's when DLP is a valid use case if that data is going to be leaving the organization. For internal sharing, whether something should be allowed, should not be allowed, that's generally when we leverage trust rules as a concept. And that's generally because the needs are different. And it's not really sensitive information in the sense of it's company information, but it's should not be shared externally. That's a different type of sensitive than between teams. And I believe there was a question around earlier, or I guess a point about recent updates with Chrome. So kind of sideways related. Google Workspace is constantly releasing new features every week, sometimes every day. Uh, so the Google Workspace updates blog is one of those resources that's valuable to keep track of. That's where we post everything that's changed, who's affected, what versions is it available on, what does it do, how to use it. So the Workspace update blogs, as well as the Chrome releases update blog, are valuable tools to kind of have in your tool belt for keeping up to date with everything we're doing.
Great point. I'm going to drop a link to the Workspace Updates blog as well. Amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will be keeping an eye in the community for your future questions. If you do have a moment, we'd love to hear your feedback, or any ideas or topics that you suggest for future sessions. With that, Kevin, any final thoughts or recommendations before we close out today?
No, other than the resources that we've provided. If you have anything about could we potentially use this, how do we get the conversation going around potential upgrades or seeing what we have access to, that's something that the sales specialists for your account are happy to get that conversation going. So please reach out to them for these types.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next time.